poorly timed.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll throw you under the bus, mate, and I'll do a little bit of a preamble. So we should be live now, and yeah, I am here with my, well, I think I'd like to call him my friend now, James W Jesso, and every time I say that name, I'm always inspired to say it in a kind of a kooky way, like James Jesso. Do a bit of an Ivy Winters thing if anybody watches Drag Race.
Okay.
James.
No, I'm just kidding, man.
How are you doing? It's a long time no see.
Yeah, it's good. I'm being very irresponsible and doing my last minute post right here during the introduction rather than respectfully receiving your introduction. Boom! I made it. I'm here.
You're here in the flesh. So yeah, I mean, it's great to see you again, mate. So I mean, I suppose just introduce yourself for anyone who's not familiar with James. Okay, I'll stop doing that.
You get one more.
Okay, I'll save it for the end.
Good. Yeah, I'm a author, and I've written 2 books, technically 3, but the third one we don't really talk about too much. So I've written 2 books on psychedelic mushrooms, and decomposing the shadow in the true light of darkness. And I have been touring around the world for the last 7 or 8 years, giving talks about the topics of my books, but also other topics that relate to psychedelics and my work in psychedelics, which is mostly theoretical from a presentation standpoint and deeply personal and scholarly from a how I live my relationship to psychedelics standpoint. And along with doing public events, I started a podcast about 5 or 6 years ago to sort of create sort of a digital conversation space, essentially, that at that time was not so easy to do live, but here we are doing it live, something akin to what you've got going on here. So that's who I am. Oh, and the podcast is called Adventures Through the Mind.
It is, and I would definitely recommend it. So go and check out that, and I'll put some links in the description below after the event. But yeah, and I think it's from that community aspect that you talked about. This is how we ended up doing this panel as part of the Lamps conference organised by our mutual friend Brad Adams. So that was this last weekend. And the reason I wanted to have this conversation was because we were within a time slot as part of that panel, but there were some quite juicy topics to talk about, and I was thinking, okay, perhaps we're not going to have time to go through all these. So I wanted to kind of expand on some of the kind of the questions that came up from that conference, and also the kind of the theme of our own panel, which was the role of psychedelic podcasters or vloggers or bloggers or whatever like ourselves within the role of what's called, the psychedelic renaissance. And so there's a few things there I think we can sort of get stuck into. I think probably, is there any sort of particular topics that you've got on the table, or should we just go at it from...
Well, I've actually got my notes from the conference up here on the side.
Oh, great minds, James, great minds.
Yeah, I watched probably so far. I watched about 75% of whatever the 36 sessions so far. Actually, you know what? I didn't watch most of them live. I waited till they had just finished and then watched them in 2x the speed, so I could be doing other things with my weekend as I was still participating in the conference.
But isn't that the joy of technology, though, that we can do stuff like that?
Plus, my brain is now, even if I hear my own voice in 1x the speed, it feels very strange. It's like I'm talking really slow. One thing I would like to, I'd love to sort of maybe start on what happened during the panel. And it's unfortunate that Laura Dawn couldn't be with us as well, because it would have been cool to have her on this call as well.
Yeah, I did put the feelers out to Laura, and yeah, I think she's on retreat or running a retreat. I'm not sure, but she's tied up for this time. So yeah, it was just a kind of unfortunate thing, but I'd love to catch up with her again at some point. But sure, yeah, what was on your mind?
Well, I feel like I can wow, so many thoughts at once. I don't feel really good about how that panel went. But I think the reason I don't feel good about how it went is because it didn't have an opportunity to come to fruit during the experience. And it sort of was just sort of laying the foundation of rapport, as guided by Shane Moss, who is funny and personable. But his funny personability, like was creating a great atmosphere for us to be landing with each other, but it didn't sort of drop us into a serious discussion. Although I anticipate it was about to, there wasn't any time. So I kind of walked away feeling like, the idea was the role of podcasting in the psychedelic renaissance or something like that. And I had presented this question to explore. I don't know if you could pull it up, the initial sort of description of the topic there. And but what came out of it, it just sort of came out as though the role of podcasting is something like a bunch of people who don't know what they're doing, laughing and joking and talking about psychedelics on the internet, which sometimes is true, because also one of the biggest lessons out of psychedelics is like something like something, like it's all a joke. Life's funny.
Yeah,
like,
cosmic joke.
Don't take yourself too seriously, but it's so much more than that too. When Laura Dawn mentioned that she considers podcasting something like a spiritual practice, I don't know if I would explicitly go that far for myself, but I hold this podcasting thing as something I do that's very serious. I hold myself to a high degree of integrity around how I show up, what I show up with, and what I'm producing for the culture, and what I am, with aspirations, certainly not always successful, hoping to give into and build into the culture to help sort of create this sort of like increased development or increased maybe anti-fragility to psychedelic culture by having a diverse set of topics and also a particular sort of quality of conversation that's floating through psychedelic topics as well. Not to say that my quality is the right quality or something, but it's more like a quality of conversation that I think contributes to what should be a myriad of different voices. And I think to me that's something quite serious. And if people just tuned into the podcast, it was fun, or that panel was fun and sort of lighthearted for the end of a pretty intense weekend. But I feel like it did a disservice to what the actual topic could have been about.
Yeah, I think, I totally agree. I think the way it felt to me was that we nailed the icebreaker. I think we were all sort of really, totally. And that's kind of, when you're doing a panel like that, I've done sort of one similar thing previous, but then you're always kind of wondering what's the, there's a bit of nerves. How do I fit in with these guys? How do I interact with these guys? And I thought that was the awesome part about it for me, is that we just seemed to settle into this flow. And just at that moment, it was like, okay, time's up. And I think, it was one of my ideas for how that might be handled in future, was I think that rather than having all the panels running in sequence, particularly when you're doing something like this where these things can be watched afterwards, is actually maybe to have them running in parallel. So the different sort of things could all be running, you could run 3 or 4 at the same time with people opting into the room they're interested in. And then each one then could run for much longer, because I think we could have easily gone an hour and a half, I think, on the vibe that we had in that panel. And it was such a good vibe. I couldn't believe how quickly that sort of 30 minutes flew by. And I was kind of lamenting a bit. I think, we really could have put a big ending on this. And I totally agree with your take on the kind of the jovial aspect versus the more serious aspect, because certainly all the notes that I prepared, I was really zoned in to the concept which Brad had put out there, which was the kind of the light and the shadow. And that's how I was watching all these panels, like, okay, what's the positive from this? And what's the potential speed bumps from this? I wanted to sort of really, just look at it from both sides. I can see Brad's in the chat there, so I want to say, Brad, thank you so much for putting this event together, mate. And I thought the Lamps event was absolutely awesome, mate. I think you did a really good job. And I think I think the main sort of downside that me and James are covering here, there wasn't enough of it, mate. We could have had more. We needed more of that vibe.
I'll double down on most of what you just said there, Brad. It was a really excellent conference, and was pleasantly surprised how much some of the sort of main criticisms that I've been holding with the direction of the discourse around psychedelics was addressed repeatedly throughout the course of the conference from different people. And I thought that was really positive, which is, I mean, something akin to the danger of us essentially mainstreaming ourselves in an effort to, present psychedelics to the mainstream in a way that doesn't have them rejected outright. And what do we lose? What do we lose from the experience, and also from ourselves and from the potential of a culture developing, modern culture developing around the experience, when we choose to mainstream it, when we choose to all get on the Michael Pollan effect bandwagon and speak about psychedelics as if they are what they are described as by a guy who did them 5 or 6 times and then wrote a book about it. So yeah, there was a lot of great commentary, I think, around sort of like keeping in mind how much we have to be considerate of how the larger discussion space, especially corporate influences, is sort of manipulating our understanding of psychedelics and what these medicines are, and how they're being integrated. So yes, Brad, excellent conference. Yeah, very much so.
Just to come back to something that you touched on earlier, when it seemed to me that with our particular panel, with the Psychedelic podcast, and I think the role of Shane Moser in that panel was as a kind of moderator, but I came to see Shane as more of he was another member of the panel. He was kind of contributing to. What was your take around that? Did you see it as like 3 of us plus a moderator, or was it more like 4 of us?
I'd say it felt more like Shane was the MC than a moderator. Yeah, more of an MC than a moderator. And I think it actually would have unfolded really interestingly, because Shane really presents himself sort of as this sort of like I don't know, like I don't know anything. It's just a joke. But actually, he's an incredibly smart person, and what he's doing with a lot of intention and a lot of clarity and a lot of purpose. But he's also funny, and so he sort of like doesn't really front end that. He doesn't put that tense on the pre when he brings what he has to offer. And I think that it would have, like you said, it would have turned into be really great talk if there had been more time. And I think podcasting about psychedelics is actually something that's very important for the culture. We are well, it depends on what the podcast is about, but in each sort of like separate pocket that the podcast addressed, we're trying to track a bunch of different things happening across the culture and curate content according to relevance and meaning. And in order to do that, you kind of have to have a wide scope on what's happening, right? And then, of course, I assume podcasters also listen to other people's psychedelic podcasts and then sort of get guest ideas and thought ideas. And there's a lot of sort of idea sharing publicly and personally. And ultimately, we are, for a lot of people, we're the place that they'll go to make sense of what they're seeing about the science and the business and all the rest. Yeah. Because most people aren't going to the papers to figure out what psychedelics are about. They're going to go to the people commenting or commentating, right? So I think it's actually a really important role. And like I had put in my thoughts around it, that it actually, there's quite a bit of responsibility there.
Yeah, well, let me just stop you there. I'll read out that bit, and just stop me if I've got the wrong thing. But I've just pulled up the suggestion that you put in the emails that we were having backwards and forwards before the panel. So this is James's word. So for the topic, personally, I think it's something that would be interesting to talk about would be the role of psychedelic podcaster. We are the in-group in a way, but also the public media faces for wider masses. We're all dancing and weaving through the quickly altering narrative landscape of the culture. And as podcasters in particular, we're both representatives and responsibility holders for that landscape. I think it would be interesting to explore how we see ourselves within the culture and with those responsibilities in the context of what was talked about during the conference. So I don't know how you feel about hearing your own words back in my voice, Sir James. I hope that wasn't too weird for you. But yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Let me just see if I can throw in my take on what is our role as psychedelic podcasters. So I'd pretty much agree with your take on it. And just kind of add on that, in that I think we are something like the bridge here between, say, someone like, just to pick just to name it, someone like Hamilton Morris. So Hamilton Morris is, he's kind of just like us, but he's got obviously this much bigger platform and a sort of a different focus. But being in that position, or if you say someone like Dennis McKenna or whatever, then there is this kind of feeling of distance between them. Whereas I think people like sort of you and I, we're much more hands-on with our audience. We every day I am commenting to people, I'm messaging people back. As you mentioned, I'm going looking at other psychedelic YouTubers. I'm seeing what you're up to. I'm going looking at what other people's up to. So I'm kind of curating my take on the psychedelic culture, on the psychedelic renaissance, or whatever you want to call it. And then I'm sort of putting that out there. And my take is clearly different to your take. I tend to sort of come at this a bit more sort of flippantly. I center it very much within myself. But I'd like to think that there's at least some honesty in there, honesty with myself as just somebody wandering through this experience, and that's got its own kind of audience. And I think there's some people who do stuff around which is very sort of much more scientific and much more philosophy. And I think all these kind of voices together is what makes this role of the psychedelic podcaster into this kind of this bigger gestalt entity. And that's I think the responsibility part of it that you mentioned is just to be honest to what you do, and so that we can contribute to that sort of community. And I think this is something that we talked about on the last time we spoke, and certainly something I'd be interested in diving into further with today. Is like, what is this community like? How can we expand it out? Because I saw one of your videos a while ago, which I got very excited by the name of, which was or the branding of, I should say, which was around this psychedelic cafe. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was such a cool I don't know, I might have kind of run with it and maybe got your intention wrong, but this idea, this seemed to me like the way of, if we are the bridge to the wider community, then what's the link between all of us? I mean, clearly we're doing something like this now, or we did this panel on Sunday, but I feel like the community would be stronger if there was this kind of, psychedelic cafe sort of thing whereby there was a constant touch point between and ideas being exchanged and things like that. So I just wonder if you could expand out a bit. Like, what was your thinking around this term psychedelic cafe? Have I got it completely wrong, or?
Oh, there's a couple things I want to talk at. Help me hold Psychedelic Cafe for a second, because I'll come back to that.
Okay.
One thing I wanted to say is, and you did this during the panel, is that I think that you minimize the value of what you offer sometimes. You're like, oh, I'm just a this, and it's kind of focused on me, and it's a bit flippant, and that's true. But one of the things I really like about your work, Rob, is that you actually, although you sort of present that way, and you're probably doing it very authentically, there's a real value in how caring you are about what you're bringing, even when you're being flippant and sort of like foul-mouthed and shitty just for the hell of it. There's a genuineness there, and there's a genuine, what feels like a care for the impact of what you're saying, and the impact of how people will receive what you're doing. And I don't know, I think I just want to acknowledge that maybe you hold yourself in a little higher esteems than the way you sort of present yourself sometimes. But I really think that what you have to offer is a lot more than just like a flippant flower-mouthed dude talking about psychedelic experiences. I think you do offer quite a cool sort of sense-making proxy when you sort of do that Adeptus Psychonautica thing that you do.
Oh, cheers, Will. I appreciate that. And just to sort of clarify, I don't. It's definitely not my intention to devalue myself. Obviously, I think I'm, I like myself, but I want to present myself. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a journalist. I don't think of myself as a philosopher or a guru. I'm not trying to be any one of these things. I'm trying to be me. And I think I agree with you, Matt. I think there is value in me, but I want to be sort of clear that that's how I'm presenting myself, because a lot of the challenges and pushback I will get is, well, what you think you're enlightened, or what you think you're a journalist, and I'm like, no, and I'm me, and that's fine. Like, this is my experience. So I don't mind if people think I'm crude or whatever. And I don't mind if people think I'm completely wrong. I've the only sort of stake I've got in this game is me, and I think that's just kind of the only honest way I can present myself. But I'm certainly not trying to like do the thing of like, oh, I'm a dummy, oh, but look at me, I said something clever or anything like that. It's just just here's me. I'm just an ordinary dude having, and I think I like it because it contrasts with the just absurd, bombastic, spiritual, fire hose in the face that you get from these things. So yeah, when I've got like kind of me from my upbringing in the north of England, I'm like, I mean, this is just ridiculous. Now, like what do I do with this now? And I think that's the kind of the role that I like to put on myself is to take what I think we can all agree are just these just amazing experiences and just kind of anchor it within just me, And so, yeah, I mean, I've got to say, I really appreciate, that you sort of pick up on that. But yeah, I'm definitely not self-loathing or anything like that.
Right. Yeah, no, I didn't pick up on any self-loathing. I think I just wanted to celebrate you.
Thanks, dude. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So Psychedelic Cafe.
There's one more.
Okay.
For holding it in. This is the other thing is about responsibility. I think we'll all understand that responsibility differently. But one thing that really came to me during the conference, that's only really coming together now. I'm looking at my notes, and it's all over my notes, but it's only making sense to me now. Is this comment that I made about the mainstreaming, that we have to be careful that we don't mainstream ourselves as we attempt to participate in a type of presentation of psychedelics to the mainstream that legitimizes them enough so to create institutions and networks of access to psychedelics for the people who need them and ultimately for whoever the hell wants them. Mm-hmm. And we have to be careful that we don't mainstream ourselves in the process, that we don't become sort of distorted caricatures of the mainstreaming process rather than staying sort of genuine to the culture. And part of that, I think, connects with this whole psychedelic capitalism thing. Mm-hmm. And it is, sure, it's possible to sort of maybe contort what we're doing or sort of like incline in one direction or another in order to actually make money in the psychedelic industry right now, or the growing psychedelic industry. I mean, as podcasters, I'm not sure how we're going to do it, but like there's possibilities to get into different industries and so on and so forth. But I also think it's important to keep in mind that social capital is a thing too. And I think it's easy right now, especially in sort of the cult of personality reality of internet life, and sort of like internet persona life and the type of like dopamine feedback hits we get from that we don't start, like I said, mainstreaming ourselves, that we don't start sort of altering how we represent ourselves, what we talk about, and why we talk about things to make it more broadly palatable in a way that brings social capital. That it's possible to be utilizing the growing popularity of psychedelics, jumping on the mainstream bandwagon, and then distorting ourselves from what might have been more authentic in order to socially capitalize off of this mainstreaming and possibly financially capitalize as well.
Yeah, I mean,
to me that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say.
That's something to hang on.
Go on, you go. You go, James. You go.
So that, to me, that's something to hang on, and I wonder about this because I think that one of the things that I come to learn over and over again taking psychedelics is something like there's no way I'm going to figure this out. There's no way I should figure this out. And so really there's a degree to which I shouldn't even try. However, there's in order to respect and revere it, I have to try to a certain degree and in a certain way. And there's this weird balance of sort of staying engaged with the mystery and staying surrendered to the mystery. I mean, at least before and after. During, it might be only one option, surrender or else. And I think there's something there around the growing popularity of psychedelics, and so obviously psychedelic related internet content, and wondering about how do I sort of stay abreast of this thing, sort of stay on the front end of this thing in a way that creates a space for more people to find what they're looking for, which is value, right? Ultimately value, without straying away from maybe what are my own personal values, but not by being like, well, I'm just going to be underground forever, and I'm going to keep it constantly lo-fi. Like, that's something I've been thinking about recently, is like, where's the balance there too, to utilize the growing popularity to create a broader sort of like place to do the podcasting thing, but not in a way where I distort myself in order to socially capitalize off it.
Yeah, so there's a lot. I'm going to try and keep all that in mind and sort of unpack it. So the first bit, I totally agree, and I've come up against that same kind of thing myself, where I'm like, okay, at what point am I reporting on the thing, and at what point is the act of reporting beginning to distort my interaction with it? And the kind of the one that jumps to mind, I don't know how familiar you are with him, but it's Brian Rose from London Real, who I think is the kind of the epitome of what you just described, where sort of started dipping into this psychedelic culture, and there's some questions on whether he was ever legitimately interested in it or not. But then it seemed to be using it to stamp the psychedelic passport, which you could then monetize in a way to sort of bring people, to give him that kind of credential.
Well, I think he ended up doing that more with free speech in the long run than with psychedelics in particular. Yeah. But that's kind of how he got his initial cred as being an ayahuasca psychedelic person, for sure.
Exactly. And then, but completely went through the motions, and sort of, I would say that probably self-deceived himself through those kind of motions. And so then the concern is, well, can I do that to myself? Am I self-deceiving myself? And I've certainly had this feeling when I've been on stuff like an ayahuasca retreat, at the point where I'd started this channel. And so I knew that I was going to start, videoing it, because I was going to review things and I wanted to capture stuff. And then I was like, okay, well, at what point am I here videoing this thing? And at what point am I here for myself? And it's a tricky one to detach yourself sometimes from this YouTube thing. Just to come to the second part of what you mentioned around like how translating the experience, because I think the idea of being able to have a complete understanding of this experience is ludicrous. It's just so that, I am humbled by it every time, to the point of hysteria. I'm just laughing on the floor at how insignificant but yet integral I am to this just incredible experience that's unfolded before me. And every time my jaw is on the floor, and I'm just filled with like the awe and wonder at what's happened to me. And so what do you do with that? Because I want to, well, first of all, I want to talk about it because I want to try and capture the magic of what happened. I want to record it for myself, and I want to share it with others. And you can't help but try and put your own understanding on what happened. And even as you render it into 2D shapes and into flat words, you are, it's too strong a word, but twisting it somehow. It's because it's not, whatever you say about it or whatever you display about it is not it. It's not even close. So then the kind of question, well, what's the point? But the point is, I think it's, it's the same as writing a poem about being in the middle of the ocean and just seeing the majesty of the ocean, or looking up at the moon and seeing the, you've got to just try, because it just commands something within you to talk about it, just to say what it means to you at that moment. And that's the thing where I always try and anchor myself in, is meaning. Like, this means the world to me. And just in the same way that I could describe how much my wife means to me, or how much my children mean to me, and it doesn't mean anything outside of me, but it's in some way we can connect with each other, through those kind of shared meanings. So that's why I kind of tend to focus my, or a lot of the content anyway, or certainly my favorite bits of the content on my channel is around this kind of this storytelling and this meaning. And this is not it, but this is what it meant to me, and I hope I can convey some of that to you, to perhaps to inspire or to open somebody's mind to have their own story, and it won't be the same as mine story. And this is why I always recoil a little bit against the people who've got absolute authority or absolute understanding of these things, because my story is not their story, and your story, their understanding is their understanding. It's not my. It's not what it meant to me. And I would rather encourage people to find their own story rather than import somebody else's mythology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. When you were saying that about the knowing, I thought about something Stephen Jenkinson talks about, like knowing as an acquisition, that you don't lose what you know, you just get more and more of it every day. And I think he described a PhD as piling higher and deeper or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I noticed one of my sort of like first aversions to the conference was the first few talks. I mean, it could have been where I was at in my mind, but there was this real sense of people talking as if they knew, like they were deep in the knowing. They were reporting on science, and I think the wellness panel was during that time. Mm-hmm. And I was like, this is the mainstreaming. Like this is it. Like, where's the psychedelic experience here? There's no psychedelic experience here. There's just people talking about what they've decided it's for, And then Colin Wells came on, and I was like, whoa, this guy feels like he's coming from that place of like, yeah, I know what I'm doing, and I know that I'm doing it well, and I also know that I know nothing ultimately. And that was something that I was like, oh, cool. And then thankfully there was a lot more sort of representation of that sort of perspective throughout the rest of the conference. And maybe I just like had my sort of like hard edge of like the mainstream like broken a little bit, and I was actually able to see people.
Well, let's rewind a little bit, because I think I think it might be good if we step through some of these things, because the people might not know who Colin is and what the content was of that particular one. So if I can just backtrack us to, so let me try and get my dates right. The conference started on Friday, wasn't it? 'Cause the times are a bit skewed for me. And I think the first one that I saw, which I'd like to talk about, was, and I hope I pronounced the guy's name right, it was Rak Razam. Was that? Mm-hmm. Rak? Mm-hmm. And I think that, so this was on the Friday, and the sort of the theme of his panel, what I took from it was, he was very much about we need to sort of get on this. No, there's not enough time. Did you see this panel, by the way, James? Or?
I didn't. The panel, I saw half of his talk. The beginning.
Sorry, the talk. It wasn't a panel yet. It was a talk.
I had to step away to do an errand. And then when it started, I was feeling a little. I don't know. I felt a little uncomfortable with sort of like the certainty. And then at the end, when he had made the comment about how we all need to start taking psychedelics because of climate crisis, I got a really hard edge about that. That was like the opposite side was like, yeah, the scientific certainty of knowing, like, we have these results, it's like this. And then that sort of like new agey, like, I had the experience, so it means this. And I didn't actually see the whole talk, so I'm really basing this off my assumptions on what he was going for, based on also some of the other things he said. Although I really like Rak, and I appreciate his contribution to the culture.
Yeah, well, I think what I took, I think you pretty got the beats of it there. So there was this kind of sense of urgency around, all these kind of potential catastrophes that could happen, and as a species, our mindset and has become sort of muddled and clouded by all the kind of the systems and stuff that are in place, and that we don't have time for us to kind of necessarily philosophize our way out of this or just raise our consciousness out of it. We need a helping hand. So what he proposed was, we need to start doing psychedelics sort of now. You need to just kind of get on them like straight away. And I think I had a similar reaction to yours. I was like, oh, okay. Because within the content that I do, although I certainly talk about the fantastical experiences, I also do try and put across a bit of caution here. I constantly say, like, I don't think these things are necessary for everyone. And what the bit I wanted to, that was the kind of the light, the light part of Rak's talk. And so I was looking at each one of these talks as, okay, if that's the light, what's the shadow here? And I was sort of thinking, if we do this, if we fully commit to this, and basically the kind of, the suggestion was something that we've all heard at some kind of,
some kind of water supplies.
Yeah, more or less. We just everybody needs to do this. It will solve all the world's problems. And I was like, you can do that, but are we ready for the fallout of that? Because Like
so many unintended consequences.
Yeah. And I thought the collateral damage bit is something that's, when we talk about the psychedelic renaissance, we talk about knowledge of these medicines. We talk about people being facilitators. We talk about people being sort of shamans, stuff like that. We talk about, let's talk about around integration stuff, but we don't really talk about what happens when the shit hits the fucking fan. And like, just, there are people who are just going to end up, it might be a minority of people, but people whose lives are just going to be incomprehensibly turned upside down by these products.
Like he who shall not be named, according to your suggestion on your channel. Right.
So that was the bit I thought of, like, who's going to step up for those roles? Who's going to be the person who, or who's going to put the systems in place to help these people who are going to be the collateral damage of this kind of revolution? And that was the shadow element, I thought it. So I don't know, what are your thoughts around that?
Well, I'll comment on what you said, but I can't comment too much further on Rack's talk because I only listened to the beginning and the end. I've heard Rack talk in a number of different places. I have a sort of sense of his thing, although not well enough to say that I have a really informed opinion on him or his work. So that sort of like everybody needs to take psychedelics, that's going to solve the issue, completely negates the reality of context-mediated experiences, and that I don't like the idea of non-specific amplifiers of consciousness. I feel like it's a little sort of like, yeah, this is how smart we are, but and also like there's, when you say non-specific amplifiers of consciousness, you and this is maybe somewhere where we would differ. You sort of like put you remove all potential agency from those plants and from those fungi. You make it all about a human thing, about a human knowing and a human certainty and a human will and a human, like, everything exists under the reference of humans being superior and us having all deciding factors and all the rest. And I think when you say non-specific amplifiers of consciousness or tools for this and that, what you're basically doing is saying, like, everything that isn't human is basically just is an extension of the human hand and of the human will, and that is what it is. And the sort of like monotheistic tones just drip in that, regardless of how scientific and secular that language just comes from. And I have a lot of deep, profound respect for the people who brought those terms into existence. Non-specific amplifiers of consciousness. So Groff, who's probably one of the most important figures that have ever existed in psychedelic culture, and I hold him in very high regards. So that all said, what is the context in which people are taking psychedelics? Okay, well, the context of use is set, setting, and dose, right? Set is mindset, setting is the sort of outside things, but there's also a socio-cultural context, right, which is represented in the things around you, whether or not there's shamans and flower or like feathers and chacapas and Palo Santo, or if there's bass music and like people wearing a whole lot of single-use party supplies made in China, party outfit made in China, which, lots of people take lots of psychedelics at festivals, and I tell you what, they're not saving the earth 100%, and guilty as charged at times in my life, So when we think about what is the cultural context in which people take psychedelics and make sense of their psychedelic experiences, well, then we have to look in, like, what is the prevailing quality and content of discourse on psychedelics, right? And how much is that prevailing discourse, contributing to or obfuscating that person's capacity to leverage that experience in a way that is positive to them, but also, in effect, positive to the larger web of relationships their life is nested within, both with their things that they do, but also with the people they're with their society, with the environment, with the plants and food sheds and all the rest. And this is going back into the role of podcasting, right? Because we are contributing to the unfolding of this cultural discourse. And if we all just become journalist iterations of what's going to hit the highest SEO, then the reality is the psychedelic experience isn't gonna amount to a whole lot for us as a culture, as a people, or it's gonna leave a lot of people confused in their wake, because a lot of people can take psychedelics and still come out the other side being pretty confident that it's still all about them and their superiority as humans, as individuals, as that particular ego. And I don't think overtly spiritualizing it is going to make much of a difference. But I don't think sort of trying to secularize it is going to be any better either. So I don't know. I didn't know where I was going when I started saying this. So that's kind of my response to this. It's not really a response to Rack at all, or his talk, just sort of what you said there and what kind of came up for me.
Yeah, sure. And I think that the thing here is we're not sort of debunking or sort of criticizing. I think the whole point of a panel or an event like Lamps is to stimulate conversation. And so that's
totally, because I don't know. Rack could actually be right. And it could be my own narrow-mindedness that I need to be correct in my ambivalence, that blocks me from recognizing that Rack is entirely on point. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly, mate. And I think the thing, what I took away from it is there was an optimism there, and there was a kind of a call to arms, a call to action, I should say, I think it's better, to do something, that we should do something, and and I think that's that's what kind of we're doing. I think that's what our community is doing. We are doing something, and I think maybe it's just the details of what that thing is. I was kind of a little bit wary of, like, the thing that we just mentioned, and I for similar reasons like yourself, I don't like this idea necessarily that there's something baked into these substances which just make you fundamentally good. And we've seen this all over the place. You can be completely politically, ideologically, ethically opposed and all like DMT. It doesn't necessarily just make you a good person. And I think in some cases, certainly what I've seen in the kind of the drive-through spirituality that's kind of popped up in when things like social media, like guys like Brian Rose or other kind of people who've invested so much of their identity into this persona, when they collide with something like psychedelics, then it doesn't necessarily humble them. Sometimes it just absolutely amplifies them into something very what I would undesirable to me anyway. It's I think you can end up with these sort of ego caricatures. So
that's actually James Orrock, who wrote the Tryptamine Palace and the new psychedelic revolution. Mm-hmm. The late James Orrock, who died last year, doing what he loved, which was paragliding. Not that makes it any better, but it's sad to have him be gone. He was a great contributor to the culture, but he had talked about it on my show. He said, the ego's kind of like a muscle. You break it down and it gets stronger, mm-hmm. right? And it was my comment on, like, what is it with the 5-MeO DMT scene and why it is that it seems like they have the biggest egos out of everyone in the psychedelic culture? It was like,
it does seem like that. I mean, there is, I've
not
kind of,
everyone, but.
Yeah, certainly, but I think it's the louder voices there, and certainly the ones which have some of the, for want of a better, like sort of negative PR around them, do seem to be associated that way. And it was something that was on my mind when I started doing 5-MeO. I was like, is this going to make me one of those kind of people? And I was like talking to my wife, like, just keep me in check here. Don't let me become one of the, someone who's going to end up causing harm to myself or to other people just with sort of crazy ideas. Mm-hmm. But just to sort of come back a little bit to something you said earlier. So what's your concerns then around when you say, like, the mainstreaming of psychedelics and or I think you mentioned, like, sort of the capitalism aspects. I think I wonder how to slice this up, because the mainstreaming and it becoming part of the mainstream systems like capitalism or like sort of, it seems, I don't know how those two things get separated. And now I've certainly got the same concerns that probably you and everybody else has got around companies getting exclusive rights. I mean, I'm not even sure how that would play out, seeing as these things come from, we're quite good at getting hold of these things, but the idea is repugnant anyway. But yeah, what's your particular concerns and how do you think we can get around it?
Well, I don't know how to get around it.
Solve the world's economic problems, James. Come on.
I don't know how we get around it. I'm not even entirely sure I understand the problem, but
Well, what's your concern then? What is it that's giving you the gut reaction?
I'm getting there.
Okay.
I'm getting there. So when psychedelic experience is context mediated, sure, right? But how we come to understand what it is that we went through and what it means in our lives is dependent upon the stories we have and the sort of narrativizing support we have out of those experiences, leading into and coming out of them afterwards. Mm-hmm. And when we're in a situation where psychedelics are being presented and in a mainstream effort, which is an effort to legitimize them, there's a real doubling down on the legitimization tracks that are most likely to work, which is they're a medicine for sick people, mm-hmm. or they're a medicine for well people, for example, right? And so in that context now, what are psychedelics for? Well, psychedelics are for you to feel better when things aren't good, which means psychedelics now are the solution to the problem that is mental health, the mental health crisis, mm-hmm. mental health epidemic, pandemic. But what actually causes that? The cause of it is the entire structure of how our society is situated, and modernity, and a lot of things that have just completely stolen meaning out of people's lives. And when we make psychedelics basically about curing or healing or treating that sort of like that depression, that suffering, yes, we're bringing positivity back into people's lives. That's good, but is that what they're for? Mm. Are they there to make us feel better living inside of a system that's killing us and the planet and a number of other things so that we don't have to suffer the consequences of that system? We can just return to our lives feeling happy and meaningful again, And if we think about from a wellness standpoint, okay, so I'm not sick. I'm not trying to fix the cause of this. I just want to feel better. Okay, so psychedelics are about me. Psychedelics and the experience they offer me is about making me feel better, about me being more well, about me being able to accomplish what I want and my goals and my dreams, And when the narrative is around these things, I think there's something really lost, which is, there's something in that experience that I think calls us to action somewhere that is easily obfuscated or easily lost in the mix. If all we've got is narratives about them being tools to fix sick minds, or tools to make me happier at work, whatever it might be, or tools to make me feel like I'm living a life on purpose, which I don't think isn't valuable, but I just think that there's so much more than that. And my concern is that okay, for example, Buddhism, okay? Mm-hmm. Buddhism is not just it's not just like a spiritual religion and a set of practices. It has like in it, there's codes for ethics, morality, conduct, And you would think that the introduction of Buddhist meditation would have an incredibly powerful impact on our society, right? That people would be living by the Eightfold Noble Path. They'd be living inspired by the Four Noble Truths, and meditation was the gateway to that. But the reality is that meditation right now is just about clearing your mind so you can get back to work, because all those other things were stripped from it. And it was stripped from it and then also reduced down so that the only meditation that's being offered is the meditation least likely to really upset you, only the meditation that's likely to help you keep going with the way things are. And that's what's going to happen. I think I'm afraid that that's what's going to happen with psychedelics. And we're sort of going to lose the baby with the bathwater. Although that can be beneficial for a lot of people, it scares me to think that we as a psychedelic culture, I don't like using the term community. We've talked about that on that interview you did with me. Mm-hmm. That we're gonna forget all of that, and we're just gonna stand in line and start championing these other narratives, which I don't think are in like big respect to Rack. I don't think I remember anyone else talking about the climate crisis. That actually maybe we should be doing something about that as well while we're talking about medicalization of psychedelics. That's great. Well, what about the climate crisis? So, and like I said, I don't know. I'm not coming out here trying to pontificate like this is what it is, guys. Smarten the fuck up or something. I don't know. This is a place that I'm concerned, and I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm right. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I don't want to speak too much on sort of Rack's behalf here, and similarly, I don't know either. I guess, you know, I think the argument here is something around we need these, needs maybe too strong a word, but we need these substances to bootstrap us, to give us a kick up the arse in order to be able to get to this place where we can then start dealing with the systems that you just got the concerns around. Like, are we big enough now? Are we responsible enough to get the systems right and then go on our individual spiritual journeys or our own, you know, and elevate, you know, the species to where it needs to be? And I think Rack's concern was, which I share, is like, I don't know if we are. Can we just pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and just do it to get us to that place we need to be, whereby we really start mining these things for the value to, like you say, with Buddhism and meditation. I completely agree. You know, like meditation is now packaged as a thing. Like, we've had talks in I work in a sort of corporate office, and we have talks like, yeah, if you're feeling stressed, go and take 10 minutes and go and do some mindfulness exercises. And like, well,
sure, if you're not happy with your butt, do some yoga. You're gonna have a sweet ass. Plus, those pants are designed for yoga, right? That's what yoga's about.
My ass is plenty sweet already, anyway, mate. So I've got that one covered. But still, that's
your wife on that one.
but the thing is, we're not dealing with the thing that made you like. Why is work stressing me out this much? Where I need to go and do mindfulness meditation to sort of just to get me back in a frame of mind where I can then go and get stressed out again. So yeah, the chicken egg situation there is not clear to me, but I don't know if the answer is thermonuclear psychedelic mass destruction of all the existing systems by, you know, putting it in the water supply. I don't think Rack actually suggested that, but
no, I mean, we're not gonna make a lot of like mass positive, well structured changes as a society if everyone's just grappling with having their minds and souls blown open to the psychedelic multi-dimensional wonder of life. You know, I mean, that's a helpful place to orient from once you got a handle of what that thing was for you, not necessarily what that thing was. But yeah, it makes me think too. We can maybe get around to psychedelic cafes here. One of the psychedelic cafes I did was on what psychedelics can teach us about dealing with crisis. And it was sort of just coming into the pandemic. I don't know how far, a couple months in when we had this call. And one of the sort of inquiries that I brought in that I thought was interesting is like, where's the balance between needing to act like as soon as possible because we don't have time to wait, and needing to go about this actions thoughtfully, cautiously, and calculatedly, so that we don't create more harm in the long run, but through the unintended consequences of our sort of knee-jerk attempts of fixing the problem that very much needs to be fixed as soon as possible. And I'm not sure how that connects in, but there's something there too.
Let me just try and connect it, because I think this ties nicely in to the whole the topic, which has sort of been a big part of my channel for the first half of this year, which was around this thing around ethics and what is happening that is what is ethical, what are people allowed to do within these spaces. And you know, I sort of entered into that debate because I didn't agree with some of these, how some of these conversations were taking part, but I can understand why those conversations were taking part that way. And I think it's the same thing you just described. It was people were reacting to something. There was a problem on the horizon. And so the solution was, nuclear mass destruction, just obliterate that thing. And my take was, there was like, whoa, there's a bit of nuance here. But it was even just trying to unpick that one aspect of it, which is, the whole what is and is not allowed is a part of this, psychedelic culture debate that's going on. Even that got very tricky. And And that was certainly, that was also covered in one of the panels on as part of the LAMPS conference. Just
the ethics panel.
Exactly, yeah. With
that was an excellent panel. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can only remember Anna's name. I can't remember the name of the other two. Well, Anna, there was Anna and Brad, and
if Brad's still in the chat, maybe you could drop those names in there.
Yeah. Sorry, I feel terrible now. I didn't remember everyone's name, but I mean that in itself, that whole topic around ethics is a kind of a minefield, and I think they even covered it within that panel. Was a lot of people's intuitions around this area are based on something happening in the US or something happening, that's very close almost to the sort of psychiatric model of a very sort of a clean experience happening in centres, being sort of moderated by people we can very easily, I don't know, hold accountable, and almost following the same kind of model. Whereas in reality, these things are playing out in all sorts of weird and wonderful ways in cultures that are nothing like our own, and in some ways that people would think were very extreme. And I certainly remember when I first learned of something like ayahuasca, then it seemed like the most insane thing ever to me. I could not understand why people would want to get high and be sick and shit themselves. It just seemed like absolute madness. And whereas now I think this is well, it's a Wednesday, that's absolutely fine. But things get more and more extreme, and where those lines are, I don't know, it gets very messy. So that was one aspect of that where I think just shows how convoluted psychedelic culture can be. I realize I'm jumping all over the place here, but can we come back to Colin Wells, who we talked about earlier, or did you have something else you wanted to sort of say on that one?
No, I mean, like, we could talk about the psychedelic cafes if you wanted to, but I think
let's put that one towards the end. I think, because I think that's if we do sort of go and do the conferencey stuff first, we'll keep Brad happy, and
well, I'm not sure we could get through all of these. Like, I have only seen like 2/3 of them, even, right? So
yeah, no, we definitely can't get through all of them. We'll be here forever. But I think the ones I would like to touch on is certainly the Collins one, and I think just those ones with the ones that we talked to with the ethics panel and with Rack and Collins, and then if there's any others that you want to mention, but
I'll put about the ethics panel. I don't know who said it, but I wrote this down because I thought it was incredible, which was this question that she presented, which was, are we seeing the shadow side of psychedelics, or are psychedelics revealing the shadow side of ourselves? And I think that's something that, for people who didn't attend the conference, to have sort of dropped in while watching this.
Yeah, I think it's probably the latter, because I think for most of us, we're not even aware of this shadow aspect until psychedelics. I mean, some people maybe who have more into that kind of literature around sort of like the psychoanalysis of all those things, but certainly I didn't have that model of a shadow until then, until I had started going through these experiences and like, what is going on with me? What is this thing that I recoil from? What is this thing I recognize but I don't like? And so yeah, I think it's, you could say the shadow is always there in ignorance, but it's I think psychedelics, I don't know whether does it amplify it, or is it just know that it's one of those things when you're in ignorance of something, you don't necessarily know it's there, or maybe it wasn't there. I don't know. So do you think what would be your take on that quote then? Do you think psychedelics bring out the shadow, or?
Well, you know what? I am not going to try to answer that, because I don't think that the value of that question is in attempting to ascertain certainly what the answer is, but to wonder about it in a way that it maybe guides further inquiry on the what's and whys and hows we're going about our explorations of psychedelics, be it personally or institutionally.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to what we were saying before around what do we get from these experiences. Some of these things aren't necessarily meant to be answered or understood. You're just meant to kind of sit with them, I think, and just see what rises within you, and it's not necessarily the right answer or the wrong answer. So I think it's a good question to leave unanswered there, mate. So I'll circle back round to the Colin Wells one, because I know this is one we wanted to talk about, and it's just such a great story as well. It's almost, this is one of those ones where it's a kind of a shame that something like Lamps is behind a paywall, because it would be good to be able to expose certain chunks of it. Maybe this is something I'll talk to Brad about, because I think this would be a way of promoting the conference if there is at least snippets that we can put out. And I think Colin was one of those. So I'll just, for the benefit of the audience, Colin Wells is a military veteran who's done several sort of tours of duty. From what I can see, looks like a sort of huge, sort of typical strapping soldier dude, sort of looks tough as nails, has been through all these kind of like tours of duty, and as the kind of sad situation as with many veterans, came back a very damaged human, just, had kind of a PTSD, was finding it very difficult to integrate back into normal society, ended up becoming homeless at one point, was just filled with anger and rage, and at some point managed to come across plant medicines. I think it was cannabis he named at first, but I think he's also mentioned he'd worked his way through pretty much, all the sort of major psychedelics, and has taken those experiences of himself, the healing that he himself found, and has sort of made it his life mission to bring other veterans into that fold, and sort of make a community of veterans. And his organization is called Veterans Walk and Talk, where the whole mission is, guys, let's just get out there, let's be together, let's talk about our experiences, let's go for a hike and we'll talk about our experiences. And I think maybe there's a few extra letters that kind of should be in there, is like walk and talk, and we'll get incredibly high and have an amazing transcendent experience and hopefully heal our souls. And so, yeah, I mean, I think along with most people who saw it, my heart was like breaking watching this guy's story. But do you want to sort of put your own take in there, mate? What did you get from it?
I think I got sort of like what you had gotten from it there. That's sort of like being moved by his sort of like commitment to helping others. And there was a couple of things that he said that I thought were really beautiful. Like one of which was, healed people heal people, which I think is a spin on the hurt people premise. There was something else that he said about like we need to keep in mind that like the psychotherapeutic clinical model is not necessarily what's going to work for everyone, and not necessarily what everyone's going to want. Chris Killam mentioned that a number of times in the View things he was on, and I think Colin had said something like, taking psychedelics inside the clinic is pretty interesting, but taking them, I can't remember where he said, but like basically like down in the forest is a hell of a lot more interesting. Yeah. And that's, to me, that's something there too, is that psychedelics in nature, psychedelics in a larger context than our own sort of like navel-gazing, anthropocentric sense of what's most important in life, which in the clinic, ultimately, that is, by it being in a clinic, it is a part of the very system that is that navel gazing, and they're going to be sort of revolutionary agents inside of there that are sort of like, they're opening the door for people. And I think that's one of the big benefits that's going to happen. But being able to sort of like be taken aback by the wonder of what is around you, that is living and bigger than you, but an integral part of who you are, and you are an integral part of it, which you get in a psychedelic experience with eye shades and headphones and inside a clinic, but not in the same way that it's palpably a thing outside of you, that it is a tree, it's a forest, it's a river, it's a living something that is being hurt by our actions, And when Colin said that, I was like, that's amazing, that he spoke to that, and there was so much felt like honest humility there, him being like, yeah, I'm doing good work. I believe I'm doing good work. I stand behind it. And like, I ultimately know nothing, like the mushrooms, the medicine has shown me. And it wasn't in a way that felt like sort of like feigning humility that some people say, like, oh, I'm just humble, I'm humbled by the experience, but actually that's just a sort of like insidious way to sort of assert their superiority of perspective, opinion, practice, etc. And there was something else that he said. I interviewed Jesse Gould, I think that's his name, from Heroic Hearts Project.
Okay.
I haven't released it yet, but Heroic Hearts Project is is a organization that's helping bring veterans into contact with ayahuasca, ketamine clinics, etc., to help with trauma. And I asked him a bunch of what I sort of warned him in advance were going to be like pretty heavy questions about the military-industrial complex and whether or not there's shifting of political ideologies and what the value of sort of like, is what does those things, those types of questions.
Yeah.
And he really came back with what I understand to be the kind of answer that would make sense for his organization, which is like, yeah, I mean, those things obviously matter, but that's not what we're doing this for. We're doing this to help veterans, and there's no expectation. There isn't really like a huge track record of veterans changing their political views or whatever. They just get healthier, and that's cool. But what I liked about what Colin said is he quoted a friend of his, and he said, the only way to help veterans is to stop creating more veterans. Which is him saying, like, if we want to solve the problem that is people being damaged by the military-industrial complex, the ultimate end goal should be dismantling the military-industrial complex. He didn't say those words explicitly, but I really respected that he inclined to that. I also really liked his hat.
He did have a pretty
joke. He commented on the hat a few times. So, I mean, again, like I often speak with a lot of sort of like confidence behind what I'm saying, and I'm usually confidently saying what I'm saying in the fact that I'm confidently speaking, but I don't necessarily think that everything I'm saying is correct or true or the right way to put it. But I was inspired by his thoughts on those things.
Yeah, I mean, I likewise. I think there's a couple of bits I just want to highlight from that talk, and again, I'm kind of coming at it from this light and shadow perspective. So I mean, and also just to. There's one anecdote which I just want to mention, and I hope I do it justice. But just to sort of drive home what an impact this had on this guy, on Colin, the bit that really just broke my heart was he was talking about he got to the end of the road and he pulled out his pistol and he put the gun to his head and he was ready to call it a day, and he just knew he was going to pull the trigger, and he couldn't not pull the trigger, but at the last minute he managed to sort of pull the gun down but still had to pull the trigger and just shot himself through the leg. And suicide has always been a sort of a topic that's unfortunately, I don't know how best to say it, but it affects me because of my own sort of family history. And so just to hear somebody on the brink of it like that, it was just heartbreaking, and it couldn't help but make you sort of root for the guy that he turned this around and sort of took that experience and just made it his mission that nobody else is going to end up in this kind of position like him. The kind of, again, I was trying to put my sort of my shadow hat on. I was like, okay, well, what's the problems with possibly with this? And I had the similar kind of thoughts as I had around with Raxing, and certainly, Colin was saying that he's not a shaman, he's not a guru, he's a guy who's been through this thing and he's spending time with these things. And so I was then concerned, like, okay, well, is there a way that this could go wrong? You've got all these kind of veterans who've seen incredibly horrific acts, and do they need some more? Is it enough? Is it enough to just walk and talk, or do they need some more structure? And I'm thinking, I tend to lean a lot towards things like the traditional sort of shamanic structures and frameworks within South America. So that was my only thing. I was like, okay, is it Colin's doing it and it seems to be working, and that's great. Can anybody do this? And I think I'll throw in my own anecdote here, because I had an experience one time of being on a retreat with a veteran. And don't get me wrong, I want to be clear here, I'm not demonizing veterans. I've got nothing but appreciation for what they do, so that we can live in this in the kind of the freedoms that we live in. But I was on this retreat one time with a veteran, and he was an incredibly powerful guy, just very intimidating. He was a really nice guy, one of the nicest people I've ever met, but very physically intimidating. And he started having an extremely bad reaction to the medicine, and he was standing up and basically saying some pretty terrible things and sort of implying that violence was on the table. And we're in a room full of people all going, under the influence of ayahuasca, and my thought was like, shit, what happens here? Like what?
It can go that way.
It would not be surprised because these guys have seen some stuff I would not even want to try and imagine, and that's so. I'm not trying to put a fault or like a blame on them, but it just came to mind, like what happens in this when you've got a collection of veterans, and what, is there a worst case scenario here, and is it enough for them to? Can you just walk and talk and heal your way through these things in the way that Colin has, or is he one of the lucky ones? Is he the outlier? So that was it. Again, I'm not trying to make too much of a point here. I was just coming at this from the framework that was given to come. Like, look, what's the light? What's the shadow? And I thought that might be a potential shadow. Can we? It comes back to the same thing. Are we as human beings in the state we're at now, in the state that society's at? Can we just boost ourselves up by our bootstraps and take the power and the responsibility of these substances and do something positive with it, or are we just going to completely fuck ourselves over because we couldn't wield this power responsibly? Don't know.
Well, I'd like to say that I'm optimistic on that question, but the human track record for our present civilization, for the sort of dominant culture of sort of Western capitalist imperialism, is that no, we cannot handle the power, and we do ultimately destroy ourselves.
So let's circle back then to something we can handle the power of, which is the psychedelic cafe.
Sure. Yeah. And if it's cool for you, maybe we can. This could be the sort of last thing that we talk about, so we can come to a.
Yeah, sure. I think it's been a good chat, but yeah, let's pick your brains on that. So, what is it? What is the Psychedelic Cafe, and what can we do with it?
Right. So the Psychedelic Cafe is a figurative space that people step into in order to have a structured conversation. So it is a variety of one of my shows. So normally I do one-on-one interviews or an interview with two people. Where Psychedelic Cafe is different, it's a sort of horizontal in the sense of like equal across all sides space of a collection of people speaking to a singular topic. And although I have some added level of power because it's my show and I came up with a question, oftentimes I collaborate on the question based on the people I have on. I selected the guests. I control the time, but generally I try to participate in it as I don't misuse that power to gear the conversation at all, outside of what is my genuine sort of inclination to put in. And then the conversation itself is structured, and it's structured according to what's called Dharma talking. Dharma talking is a technology that was created by Jean Robertson. She is a brilliant woman who lives here in the city I'm in. Well, Kitchener, Ontario. She's in Waterloo, but they're basically like pretty much the same city. They're like overlapping each other. Like literally, I live in Kitchener. If I ride my bike for 5 minutes, I'm at her house in Waterloo.
Okay.
So, yeah, and she lives in a sort of a community of practice. It's all around sort of like context and language and sense making. And she has this practice called the Dharma talking, which is a structured conversation that unfolds over 3 rounds around a central question.
Okay.
And so I facilitate that. And the premise is that it creates an opportunity for structure and focus, but also flow and a space for a context that invites the emergent intelligence of the rapport to come forth. And the sort of suggestion to people participating is to be aware of what's being said, but also be aware of what's not being said. And so the conversation becomes this sort of multi-layered thing of complexity that becomes almost its own entity in and of itself, its own sort of living, breathing thing for the time frame in which it exists, sort of brought together by each individual person participating collectively, and thus the sort of like idea space becomes greater than the sum of its parts, because it is both given free rein and structured by certain sort of pragmatic levies that keep it, sort of confined to a particular area of focus. And to me, the thing that inspired me about that is getting more people talking at once on a topic rather than just me and one other person. I found that inspiring. And also in participating in these Dharma talking sessions, what came of them felt so inspiring that I wanted to share that inspiration by sharing those types of conversations. Because one of the things that I have been increasingly getting into talking about with regard to psychedelics, psilocybin in particular, which is that when it comes to receiving lessons, what is asked of you is as important as what is revealed.
Yeah.
In the sense that, what it shows you is one thing, but what it asks of you in order for that to be revealed is also something of value and to be considered and to be integrated, to be wondered about, to be learned as a lesson. How did I come to be able to receive this as meaningful? What did it ask of me to get to the place where this could be so impactful, right? There's a lesson there too. And so when I think about a conversation, these are the ways in which we share with each other. We grow together. This is the way in which we sort of like become one mind, the way that we enter in this sort of like fluid, multi-individual idea organism, and that if we can what this particular structure of conversation asks of us is to show up in a certain way. And the result is as to what is revealed is what is talked about. And my suspicion and my experience is that how we are then asked to pay attention to that conversation also asks something of this. It asks a certain quality of attention, a quality of wondering, a quality of curiosity that is itself something else that can be learned. Like, what is it is to listen to what is not being said? What is it to feel like there's something between us and it's unfolding dynamically as a consequence of what we've brought into it, but also in a way of a life of its own blossoming before us. And that's something that's possible in a conversation with another person, which becomes evident in the act of listening as well. And so when I think about, okay, what is the role of podcasting in psychedelic culture? I think it's to, bring psychedelic stuff to the world, right? And I think that way of being in conversation, that way of being in communion with other people is psychedelic in a sense, and so I am excited and inspired to bring those types of conversations in, with respect and care to Gene Robertson, who developed the technology based on something called the World Cafe. And I find it extremely valuable. Yeah. Is
it something you think, because this is something we kind of touched a bit on last time we spoke, because I'm sort of thinking like, how is there this next step in terms of what we do as separate, independent YouTubers, podcasters, whatever. So at the moment, everyone's kind of in their own sort of kingdom, and we're all putting our own take on this thing. And I think that's fine and that's necessary. And I wouldn't, I'm not trying to advocate for a sort of hive supermind or anything like that. But I was wondering, is there, what I found appealing around what you just described is this kind of this leveling of the hierarchy and these voices kind of coming together, which then generates a new voice in a way that is not, it's not me, it's not you, it's not whichever other guest you have on. It's something new that comes out of it, and I that's why I was so excited by seeing that you were doing that. And my thought was like, is there a way of, is this something that I should do? I mean, I try and do it in my own way. This is kind of my own sort of stab at it. But I was just wondering, is there a way to synchronize this somehow? Is there a way to, and it's whenever use like words like this, then people start recoiling from it because it sounds like you're trying to organize things too much, or
yeah, it's like a big government talk.
Yeah, and obviously that's not what I want. But I wonder, is there something where we, like, if all the psychedelic YouTubers could sacrifice like 1 hour a month to make these kind of talks, and for those talks not to be their own thing, but to be some part of something new which nobody's profiting from, and nobody's. I mean, I think the lamp thing is a good example of this. You know, we gave up our time to be part of something bigger, and it's a shame that it only happens once a year within this kind of limited time scale. And I was wondering, is it scalable? Is the psychedelic cafe scalable, do you think, across all the kind of this culture?
Well, I mean, pragmatically, there's only so many people you can have in the conversation before it becomes an incredibly long experience. And my experiences of doing it with 30 or so people, usually we'd break out into small groups and then return to the whole. I mean, I don't think that this cafe structure is the end all be all of how to organize and govern ourselves as sort of like as people alive in a world during, you know, a/many simultaneous and a meta crisis, you know. So I think that question is it possible that we as psychedelic YouTubers could get together and do something like that? I mean, yeah, it's totally possible if there's enough willingness and receptivity, and you know, somebody has the go get them to set up the channel and do the editing and the uploading. That could be shared, you know, if there's agreements there. That's possible. But I think your question digs into something deeper, which is like, you know, it's like, what is the value of, how do we come about building, and then to what end do we participate in communities of practice? And in that community of practice, the question of like, okay, so, you know, what is the point of this? It's like, how is it, you know, around what is it located? You know, is it around psychedelics digitally? Okay. And then to what sort of expression? Because is it more sort of navel gazing, or are we taking it somewhere of value, that we're stepping in what we're getting out of this and contributing to something greater, you know? And then the question is like, okay, so like local psychedelic organizations have this for integration, for idea sharing and all the rest, you know, networking. These can be really positive, but you know, what it means to sort of like locally organize systems of sort of practice, communities of practice, even sort of manners of governance, you know, like how would we govern who does what within the sort of like administrative responsibilities, you know. I think that's a much bigger question that I do not have the answers to at all, because it's far outside of my scope of what I understand about how to, I mean, like I'm struggling just to keep my one thing alive, you know, and like manage all the relationships I have around me, which is basically just like a handful right now because of the pandemic, you know. So but then the question is like, well, what is the power of multiple people working simultaneously towards a common goal, which is always, you know, greater than the sum of its parts, as long as it's happening collaboratively. Yeah,
I think the main sort of power, I think, of something like that, and yeah, for sure, I've no idea how that would ever work logistically, but it's a kind of a utopian idea that's floating around my head somewhere. But I think that the power of it, I think, does it. It's the power of conversation. It's the power of we've got the power of social media. We've got the power of broadcast via our channels and stuff like that. But we, you know, the downside of something like that is that people do get very tribal, and people do get very stuck in certain sort of mindsets. And I think part of the antidote to that is talking to other people. And I think it's easier for us as YouTubers, as podcasters, as voices, to become entrenched in our own voice, and so I think that's what I liked about panels or conferences like Lamps, or even just getting the chance to talk to guys like you. Is it's a chance for me to untangle some of my own stuff going on here and hear a different perspective. And I think the more, I don't know, again, maybe I'm being too utopian, but the more of that, the better. I think the more touch points between that we can have, particularly if it's within that framework that you've got within the Psychedelic Cafe, whereby it's not about who's right, it's about what do you think about this, and let's, and just sit with it, and then have some kind of output on it, but not necessarily to win, not necessarily to make a point, or to own somebody else, or to be funny, or to be whatever. It's just about what you're giving to that space. And I guess I'd sort of wrap all that up by saying I think it's just a really awesome concept, James, and I consider me one at some point in the future.
I actually am considering a psychedelic podcasting one, and also I thank you for acknowledging that, and I want to echo that back to Gene Robertson, who invented this technology, or sort of came to bring it forth into my life. People listening, you can check out more of Gene's work. She's been on my podcast called I think it's Collaborative Mindset and Humanity 3.0 or something like that. Gene Robertson and her work here. It's an organization that you could get involved with outside of the pandemic time, because they do run workshops and stuff, the Liminal Space Agency. But there are other communities of practice that are doing interesting things, even digitally, like, for example, Rebel Wisdom, which is a cool YouTube channel.
Yeah, love Rebel Wisdom.
And they also have the digital campfire wisdom sessions, which is Zoom sessions, and they're incredible, and lots of people participating, and there's activities as well as sort of discussions, and or like the Stoa, which is sort of headed by a collection of people, centrally Peter Lindbergh, who's out of Toronto, and they do a number of sessions a week, all through Zoom. But it's not even just sort of idea sharing. There's actual practices. There's a practice I've been going to called collective presencing, which is very interesting experience. And it is sort of like creating a community of practice around sort of within the digital space. But even physically, there are other places and organizations doing stuff. In Toronto, there's a group called the Rationality Project. I believe that's what they're called. And they've done live events and sort of weekends of sort of deep working, cultures of practice kind of thing. And yeah, so I mean, there's a lot there. Also there's Douglas Tatarin, who I've had on my show with the biomotive framework. In my interview with you, or your interview with me, you asked me about enlightenment. I talked about Douglas Tatarin's four facets of transformation. He has a whole community where they get together and practice Nadera and a number of other things, which is another type of practice that sort of helps create sort of emotional competence and emotional well-being. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot there for your people to hang on. I haven't looked at the chat at all. I've been trying to.
No, it's always tricky. You sort of scrolling down looking for questions, but there's a lot of comments, but not a lot of questions. But people, I think, seem very happy with the conversation that we've had. I'll just have a quick scan through. First of all, I just want to say thanks to everybody who's joined us for this conversation. But again, particularly to Brad Adams, organizer of the Lamps Conference. Brad, thanks for joining me and for taking part in the conversation. And yeah, I look forward to. Well, I think we've already discussed, Brad, that we'll have a conversation like this, so we can do a deeper dive into things around lamps and perhaps future goals and how things might go in future. But everyone who's commented, thanks a lot. I would say if you've not done already, go check out James's channel, Adventures Through the Mind. I'm a big fan, and if you like what he's saying here, well, you can see more of it, and that's so it's awesome.
Thanks, Rob. Of course, hit that little notification bell so that you get notified when new channels or new videos are uploaded. Also, as an echo, I don't know. Maybe Brad could represent this in the chat. I'm pretty sure, Brad, is it still possible for people to purchase the recordings of the Lamps Conference? Because I know that they're up on Crowdcast. So maybe there's a opportunity for people who are like, "What? This sounds amazing!" that they could actually watch these talks because they're all still up on the internet.
Yeah, I wonder if there could be maybe some sort of a discount for not seeing it live. You know what I mean? If you could, there might be a way to share it, just a reduced reduced price ticket for looking at them, or I don't know.
Brad says very soon. I don't know what that is an answer to, so people don't hold to Brad the discount thing, but yeah, very soon. So that's cool. That's cool. I really thought it was a very valuable weekend, so
yeah,
working on it.
It was great. And I thought this was a very valuable chat, James, so thanks for making time, mate. It's always a pleasure to catch up with you, and let's do it again sometime soon.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, we went from not really knowing each other at all to having all these multiple interactions. Like you said, I feel like we're becoming mates at this point.
Well, that's it. There we go. You're one of the mates. You're one of the lads now. So yeah, it's awesome, mate. Let's catch up again soon. And also, I'd just like to, I think, give a little bit of kudos to me, because if my understanding is correct, I have just popped James's live streaming cherry. So
that's an interesting sort of term of language there. It's almost like you're just like an average Joe, everyman working class craftsman.
Enough, James. It's a pleasure. Let's talk again soon, mate.